Hey everybody, this is Chuck Dixon, comic book writer and raconteur, locked up in the house, just like the rest of you, and ready to answer some more of these questions. Thank you all for contributing questions to this. Now let's start off with my old pal, Beau Smith. Um, Beau asks, what was your favorite era so far working in the comic book business and why? Um, if you don't know who Beau is, you should. Beau Smith is has been a fixture in comics, both as a fan, a professional, a kingmaker, the magic man for decades. And he's a good friend. And thanks, Beau, for the question. Um, I guess like anything else, your first experience with something, if you're lucky, is your best one. It's like everybody's favorite James Bond movie is the first one they saw. So Um, the 80s. The 80s were very, very good to me. I broke into the comic book industry at a time when if you had a pulse and knew how to work a calendar to a reasonable degree, you could get a job in comics. And I got in with the help of a number of people. One of them would be Tim Truman, who got me the assignment on Airboy, which I wrote for Eclipse Comics. And pretty much once I got in and proved my reliability, the gates were open. And I was able to take on as much work as I wanted, basically, filling my days, writing 2 comic scripts a week on average. Another great thing about getting into this period was I got to work with Larry Hama on a comic called Savage Tales, which allowed me to write war and Western stories, which were my 2 favorite comic book genres anyway. And I got to work with the legendary John Severin on a number of Western stories for Larry. And, that this and Airboy are pretty much, my first big breaks into comics. I wouldn't go full time right away. I didn't go full time, I considered, until I got the lead feature in Savage Sword of Conan. But the 80s were great for just sheer enthusiasm and just the joy of getting to work in comics. I still experience that joy. Don't get me wrong, but there's nothing like you know that first day of school. That first win at a game. You really it's lightning in the bottle. Um, the '90s, of course, were even better for me financially because better for anybody. Anybody who made it through the '80s into the '90s and stayed in comics during the early '90s boom. Um, we love to torment younger pros with stories of how great it was. We were literally treated like nobility, even by the publishers, which was remarkable. So this is a favorite period because of the productivity. I did most of my work in the '90s. While I still remain very busy, I'll never be as busy as I was then. I was doing, 8 monthlies on average, and that included specials, one shots, short stories, annuals. It was crazy, crazy times. And with the support of my family, I was able to, you know, do this work. So 80s and 90s, 80s for one reason, 90s for another. But the enthusiasm was always there and still is. Okay, Jeremy Stoa, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, says, looking back to your days at CrossGen, how long would your stories have continued given free reign? Which of the stories did you enjoy the most at the time? And given the chance, would you go back and make your own continuing epic? Yeah, CrossGen was a great experience. I never really thought about how long the series would run. I tend to get on a series, build it, and stay on till the wheels come off. I didn't have ends for any of the series in mind. I did have further arcs, and it, you know, yeah, there was no finite end. These are periodical publications in my mind. The plan is you create a title, and you write it for as long as you are contributing something positive to it, and then leave it to someone else if it's successful. But if I were to go back and work on any of them, it would be Way of the Rat. As much as I enjoyed El Cazador and my pirate story for CrossGen, Way of the Rat, I think, was most successful on every level. And a lot of that is due to the contribution of Jeff Johnson, who really created the look for this series. Being a practicing martial artist himself and having a lifelong interest in anything Asian and the Asian historical periods, he just really brought it to the series. And it's one where the characters really came to life. There's a lot of lovable characters, or at least I fell in love with them, characters in this series. And, because of Jeff's involvement and because of the way CrossGen worked, the unique way in which CrossGen worked, we were able to collaborate closely. I mean, we were in the same building every day. And we worked directly together. And I kind of picked up on Jeff's sense of humor and instilled it in Way of the Rat. This sort of sometimes bitter, sometimes optimistic sense of humor that he had, and his sense of fun. And what began as what would have been a normal period martial arts, chop sake story, turned into something a lot more. And I like it because it had every aspect. For me, successfully, it was successful in a lot of different areas. It was scary sometimes. It was very funny sometimes, exciting and suspenseful sometimes, and hopefully even thought-provoking now and then. So, if I had to return to any of them, or got a chance to return to any of them, this would be the one. Because, boy, the next story arc was going to be awesome. I hate to tease like that, because it's never going to happen. All right, next question. Silvio Spotti, I hope I pronounced that right. He said, will Winterworld have a sequel or a prequel? Winterworld is a series that I created with Jorge Zafino back in the late 80s. And it continued on at IDW with further arcs by Butch Geis and Tomas Giorello. And, apparently there was a talk of a TV deal for a long time, so the series kept going to provide more material for that. But, those deals come and go, and mostly they go. so that never happened. But there is a prequel. I wrote a prose novel prequel to Winterworld, and it's basically Scully's early life, from childhood to adolescence. It's called Winterworld: The Mechanic's Song, and it is available in print and on Kindle. So check it out on Amazon. Do you have this is Andrew Runion. Do you have an outlining process that you use every time? No. Generally, I don't outline at all. I sort of walk through the story in my head, and that may take years before I'm satisfied that I have a story, that I have, as the tired phrase goes, a beginning, a middle, and an end. So yeah, I don't do a lot of outlining. When I do the prose novels, sometimes if I'm having difficulty or if I see I'm trying to predict problems, I will write a chapter breakdown, and very brief, like this happens, chapter 2, that happens, chapter 3, they escape, chapter 4, they're captured again, whatever. Just to break down the action, and most times I don't really even follow it because I get other ideas as I'm writing. That's my problem with outlining is you can write an outline, and I've been forced to write outlines, and then I find myself adhering slavishly to the outline and not feeling free to improv further or beyond the outline to enhance it in any way. So even when I'm working from an outline, I have to remind myself, hey, this is your story. I mean, you can still make new stuff up. So I look at the outline, it's the skeleton of the story. I got to put flesh on it, but I don't do it, and I never outline in comics. Like I said, I've been forced to. When I first went to CrossGen, we didn't have editors, but we had a kind of manager. And I remember our first meeting, she was telling me that I would have to outline. And I said, I really don't like to outline. I've never outlined. Now bear in mind, I'd been in the business quite a while and had a lot of success. And she said, well, you'll learn to. I was telling her I was not going to outline. She thought I was asking for help. Uh, but in comics, I don't outline. Comics is my mutant ability, writing comics. It's in my DNA. And somehow I know page 22 is coming and I know how to get there the best way. And I don't know how that works. I don't like to think about how that works because it to me, it's like magic in my head and you don't question magic. So, Bob Kennedy, are superhero comics on their last legs? If so, what should replace them? The answer is anything. Yeah. The suicide pact that comics has formed with superhero comics began when comic book fans turned pro. And comic book fans were really superhero fans for the most part, at least the generation that took over. Earlier generations of fans like Archie Goodwin, who became pros, they were they were fans of comics. They were fans of the medium. They loved the old comic strips. They loved DC comics, things like that. And so they were, ready, willing, and able to explore any comic genre and did it well. But the generation coming after them, or half generation coming after them, was superheroes all the time. You could see it in the fanzines at the time. The fanzines were superheroes and nothing but superheroes. So when these guys became editors, that's all they were interested in. They kind of crowded out every other genre, even when the genres are selling well. I have an essay called Comics for Dummies on my website, chuckdixon.net, and it explains what happened here fully. But even in the 70s, when Western, believe it or not, and war comics were top sellers at DC, outselling any of their superheroes, the superhero editors still, wanted to dominate, and eventually did. The 80s saw a spike in different genres being successful, but as the 90s rolled in and the money was there, other than Vertigo, the entire comics industry went all in on superheroes. And that's why we are where we are today. Every flavor of comic is vanilla. There's really nothing else. I'm talking about print, mainstream, in your comic shop comics. Other than maybe Star Wars comics and the occasional, licensed movie tie-in thing, it's all superheroes. It's all anybody can think about, to the detriment of the industry and the detriment of sales. Heath McKnight asks, how would you and Graham Nolan fix Iron Man? Here's a blurry image of Iron Man by Graham. I think I can speak for Graham, is that we would return to the Stan Lee model for Tony Stark, which is the most important part of it. I mean, otherwise, anybody can be Iron Man. You put on a suit, you become Iron Man. But you return to the Stan Lee model of Tony Stark, which the movie people wisely decided to follow, which is a guy who's, modeled after Howard Hughes. And he's rich, successful, and a playboy, and he is not apologetic about it. Later writers tried to make him feel guilty for being successful. And boy, that was the wrong way to go. I mean, even to the point of him becoming an alcoholic. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Denny. Even to the point of him becoming an alcoholic, I think it was a bad idea. Because it made him pitiable. And when you see the success he's had in the movies, obviously Stan was right in his approach, because everybody loves Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayal and the emphasis on Tony being a well-adjusted guy, a bit driven, sometimes abusive, and all the rest, but never apologetic. And he used the success for the benefit of everybody. So I think that's what we would do. We would go back to that. And of course, have Iron Man beat the living hell out of a bunch of bad guys. So, next question. Matt Webster It seems every industry is just weighted down by political correctness. If I wanted to be a writer, should I even bother to do so at the moment? Of course you should. Who's going to stop you? Why should you let the zeitgeist of the moment stop you? I mean, when you think about the political correctness of today, political correctness has been around a long time, but it's like we're in a new world of political correctness now. I mean, I was watching an episode of House last night. Now, House isn't that long ago, but it seemed to me you would never be able to remake any House episode now. It seems like it's from another parallel universe, this show, or from 50 years ago, this show. The political correctness gurus, the big brothers and big sisters, have ramped up their game so much in the last few years. And we see it in, comedians who won't perform on college campuses, everybody being careful what they say all the time. To hell with all of that. Don't be careful with what you say. Especially don't be careful what you write. Write your story. I have a good friend who writes novels, and he's constantly worried about what people will think. To hell with what people will think. You're mostly writing for yourself. You got the story inside you. It's burning to get out. You just write it. And be damned anybody who says, "Oh, I'm offended." So what? Mad Magazine offended people. Who cares? Saturday Night Live offended people. The Marx Brothers offended people. I mean, get over it. But yeah, don't let anybody stop you from writing. That's crazy. You've given in then. Be like Russell Crowe. Michael Stanley says, "How did you get involved in the Batman and Spawn crossover comic?" I love this story. DC had entered a deal with Todd McFarlane, and he was going to do a Batman Spawn, which he would publish, which Frank Miller wrote. And over at DC Comics, we were going to do our own version of Batman meets Spawn. And we were told about this at one of our Batman summits. They would take us away for a few days, and we would sit in some fabulous place, eating like horses, and not out of a trough, just eating a lot, and being spoiled and talking about Batman. This is back when the money was coming in, and they could afford to spread it around a little. And these were terrific events. And at one of them, Denny O'Neil brought up Batman meets Spawn, and that there was going to be a DC Comics version. And in his opinion, it was unfair to give the assignment to just one of the three Batman writers. So his idea was that we would split the comic up, and all three at that time current Batman writers, myself, Doug Mensch, and Alan Grant, would write Batman versus Spawn, or Batman meets Spawn, whatever we ended up calling it. And so then it was a short discussion about how, now the reason for this is because the royalties are going to be huge. Everybody knew, and they were, and they continued on for years and years and years. This was going to be a huge seller, and Denny didn't want to just reward one of us. He just didn't think it was fair. And it would have spawned jealousy amongst the three of us. I think it would have spawned jealousy amongst one of us, but I don't know if all three of us. Less said about that, the better. But anyway, we all played well, and we quickly devised a way to do the book. One of us would plot it. The other would write the beginning, and the other would write the middle, and then another would write the end. The problem was none of us understood Spawn, and we left the retreat for lunch one day and bought some Spawn comics and read them, and none of us could understand them. We couldn't get to the heart of the character to even understand how to write it. So Doug Mensch volunteered to call Todd, and apparently spent hours on the phone with Todd while Todd explained Spawn to him. And Doug came back with a notepad crowded with notes from Todd, and explained the basic ABCs of the character to us so we could write it. And then it was, well, who's going to write the beginning, who's going to write the middle, who's going to write the end? So Jordan Gorfinkel wrote our names on slips of paper and put them in Denny O'Neill's hat. Denny always had this ass-kicking, um, fedora, or for lack of a better term, that he would wear. And so we put the slips of paper into the hat, and Jordan drew them out. Doug got the beginning, I got the middle, Alan Grant got the end. And I think Doug and Alan together plotted it. I know I had nothing to do with plotting it. I think they put their heads together and came up with the plot. And my only requests were, I wanted Batman to make fun of Spawn's cape, because Spawn's cape was ridiculous. Uh, and I also wanted Spawn to, when he meets Batman, to say, "You can call me Al." And Todd was fine with both of those things. So I wrote the middle 16 pages of it, if you want to take a look and see how I did with Spawn. My only other Spawn work was a pinup, believe it or not, I did for Spawn Comics, inked by Tim Harkins. So good luck finding that. I don't know what issue that was in, but that was kind of fun to work on. All right. Jeremy Lott says, would you like to run your own comic book company? Yeah, I don't think so. I'm not an administrative type. That would not be fun. I was offered group editorship of Batman when Denny retired. Denny offered it to me and told me it had already been approved. The job was mine if I wanted it. And my reply was, I can't afford the pay cut. A pay cut and moving to the New York area, yeah, it just wasn't going to work for me and my family. And Denny said that he pretty much knew that that would be my answer. But, every once in a while I think, hey, that would have been fun. If I was a single guy at the time, which I wasn't, and am not now, I probably would have thought about it harder. But, um, what might have been. But I don't think I would have lasted long in that kind of environment. I'm not real good. I was okay in the cross-gen environment because it was more honest and open at cross-gen. No matter what anybody tells you about, you could say what you wanted at cross-gen and get away with it. You weren't going to get fired. At DC Comics, there's a lot of office politics and walking on eggshells, and it's always that way. It's that way at any major publisher, and yeah, that wouldn't have been fun for me. So anyway, I do a series of time travel stories. There are 6 books in the series so far. I will be writing the 7th soon. It's called Bad Times. It's about a group of ex-military guys, ex-U.S. Army Rangers, travel through time, getting in trouble. Tons of action, fun characters, a little bit of humor here and there. And it's available on Amazon in paperback and on Kindle. All right, this is Chuck Dixon signing off. See you down the road.